Hi, my name is Zach Harrison, and this is my quadruple quotation presentation on the history of the two Indies. First, I really want to talk about Renault. When I was reading through his work, not just from this week, but last week, I found the guy to be kind of smug and kind of arrogant the way he presented his thoughts. Obviously, the guy's extremely intelligent and, he puts a lot of well thought out work, but to me, there was this underlying thought that, yeah, I know way more than everyone else. So I got kind of interested. So I looked into his background. He grew up in France, obviously, but he was also a very devout Catholic for the majority part of his life, and so that got me curious about the way he thought about free will. And the reason I bring up Renault being brought up Catholic and the idea of free will was just because he left the church as a young man in probably the early 1730s or so, having been so devout for that beginning part of his life, so much that he actually wanted to continue his life in the church. That stuff's so ingrained into your brain. So I think with this quote that I found from the Vatican archives really sheds light on and echoes through the writings, especially in the history of the two Indies. And the quote is here. And the quote is, "God created man a rational being, conferring on him the dignity of person who can initiate and control his actions. God willed that man should be left in the hand of his own counsel, so that he might, of his own accord, seek his Creator and freely attain his fully and blessed perfection by the cleaving to him." And I found this quote in the Vatican archives, and this was kind of reflective of free will of the time of 1730s, 1740s. And I think this, once again, really echoes through the way Renault writes, especially when he's talking about some of the things that was going on at the time. And now on to the first quote. The first quote I decided to pick starts like this. "In England, the love of liberty, too natural to every feeling or thinking man, excited in the people by the authors of religious innovations, and awakened in the minds of men, enlightened by becoming conversant with great writers of antiquity, who derived from their democratic government the sublimity of reason and sentiment, by which distinguished this love of liberty, kindled in every generous breast the utmost adherence for unlimited authority." When I first read this quote, I was thinking of it more in the modern context of freedom. So I was like, oh wow, they're not really that free. I mean, they still have a monarch, they still have all these things, but thinking about what's happened in the last 100 years at this time, England had the English Civil War, the Glorious Revolution, and this was just, they limited the power of the monarchs, which before that time, before any of those events, it would never have happened before. So I guess when you read it in that context, it's like, oh wow, they do have this freedom. And with that freedom, when you do have that kind of freedom at this point, you do have some new authority, not because of a monarch, reigning with an iron fist, but because you have choices now. When you have choices, you create your own authority. And I think that's kind of what this quote's saying. I mean, I see that Renault, he would go on to write about, the French Revolution and stuff. So I think this is really kind of the groundwork of revolutions. And the way I interpret it, it's the beginning, it's the stepping stone. And so I feel like this quote especially does a great job of creating that main philosophy throughout his writing, especially in book 14, that he does a really good job with explaining what he means by liberty and freedom, and once again kind of the idea of free will, which I think is still kind of echoes very much through this quote. The second quote I found is probably actually my favorite one that I found when I was going through these readings, but it's not actually from book 14, it's from book 11, but it really paints a picture on how things were being done in the Caribbean. And the quote is this: "Rome, which was now at the height of its practice and patriotic principles, after many stubborn engagements in which the greatest military skill displayed, obtained a decisive superiority over that which was corrupted by its riches. The commercial people became slaves of warlike power. And the reason I like this quote so much is because when you think of empires, really two come to mind. I know for me it's Rome and England. So I feel like this quote really is just a mirror of the way England was beginning to expand to the Americas and to the Caribbean. So throughout the times, there is Europeans going out there and trying to conquer and make it their own thing with the colonies. But with England, they really do take, especially because of Cromwell's imperialism in place of the European model, that they really try to make it the New England. You know, they're trying to have society in their colonies similar to how they were having it in England, the same way Rome did. Rome, when they expanded, ironically to England back, 2,000 years ago, they were trying to have it be the same way as it was back at Rome, where when you have empires, like say for Greece, like Alexander the Great, when he went out, he left it how it was. They weren't trying to convert them to be Greek. They just wanted to have as much control as possible. Where with Roman in Europe and English, they wanted to have it just like it was back in the capitals, like in Athens, like in London. So I feel like this quote, and it's the same thing too with the military. Both militaries at their peak were the best in the world. So they had no problems going in there and taking over as they did. Rome going across Europe, and the same when England going across Americas and the Caribbean. And now for the third quote, which goes like this. Where the experience they had of vice might prove a lesson of wisdom, where they had no occasion to attempt to remove any unfavorable imperfections, they found after their misfortune a harbor in which they rested with safety. I really like this quote because it really reflects the ideas of the first quote, where you have the love for liberty, but also you do have the authority. And by liberty, I mean you have these young British guys headed out to the Caribbean, the Americas, and all these bad things that were plaguing them back in England, drinking, gambling, those kind of things. When they're out going to these new places, they don't have time for that. They have to focus on the here and now. And so when they go to these places, they begin to wash away these old habits. And then by the time they go back to England, they are these better men. And they can better the country, not only for themselves, but for everyone. When they go across the sea, they learn how to be upstanding humans. Because when they're back in England, when they had these vices, they were tormenting not only everyone around them, but themselves. So when they go to the Caribbean and the Americas, they wash away these old vices and come back to England as better people. And now for the fourth and final quote, which goes like this. This dangerous indulgence, joined to a taste for the luxury, which then began to prevail in Europe, brought on a great revolutions in the fortunes of individuals. And I chose this quote because it really ties together the idea of freedom for me. You kind of read throughout the document that when someone has liberty, they're allowed to go out and make things for themselves. But once again, once you start making things for yourself, especially money, bad things can start to happen. People can start thinking, "Oh, I'm better than everyone else now. This is all for me." They're not thinking about the betterment of their community, and especially not their country. So this is when it starts to get, like it says in the quote, dangerous indulgence. When you start really dipping your toes in what the luxuries of the new world, by luxury, and once again I mean money, it really starts to blend, like, hey, are we having too much freedom for these people, or is this a good thing and a natural progression of our empire?